more than 3 decades since a 5-year-old boy, Justin Turner, was discovered strangled to death on his family's Berkeley County property.
His father, Victor Buddy Lee Turner, discovered the body, but now both he and his wife, Pamela Megan Turner, are facing charges in the boy's death 34 years later.
Initially, they provided information that he didn't get on that he got on the school bus and went to school, but never got off of the bus. That was not true. He never got on that bus. He never got on that bus because he was dead.
There is a bowl on the kitchen table. It is small, the kind with cartoon characters printed around the rim, the paint worn thin from too many cycles through the dishwasher. Inside, a few spoonfuls of cinnamon cereal sit in milk that has gone lukewarm. A spoon rests against the edge at an angle, the way a child leaves it when they push back from the table in a hurry, already thinking about the day ahead. No one moved it, not yet. It is the morning of March 3rd, 1989, and in a modest home on Horseshoe Road, just outside Moncks Corner, South Carolina, a 5-year-old boy named Justin Lee Turner has just finished breakfast and stepped out into the cool morning air. The pine trees that line the dirt road are still. Berkeley County is waking up slowly, the way rural places do, without urgency, without noise. A rooster somewhere in the distance, the low hum of a truck on a road you can't quite see. Justin knows this walk. He has made it dozens of times, down the dirt path from his front door, past the tree line, to the neighbor's driveway where his friend waits and the school bus eventually appears. It is not a long walk. It is not a dangerous one. It is the kind of walk that parents in small communities allow without a second thought, because nothing has ever happened here, and nothing is supposed to. He is 5 years old. He is wearing his school clothes. Somewhere ahead of him, a bus is coming. He never reaches it. By the time anyone realizes Justin Lee Turner did not arrive at Whitesville Elementary School that morning, hours have already passed. By the time the first deputy pulls onto Horseshoe Road, the sun is already setting. And by the time the full weight of what happened on that quiet Friday morning becomes clear, the community of Berkeley County will never feel quite the same again. The cereal bowl is still on the table. No one has touched it. Before any of this becomes a case number, a court filing, or a headline, Justin Lee Turner was a child. He was 5 years old, blonde-haired, and by every account from neighbors and family friends, the kind of kid who filled a room without trying. He laughed easily. He asked questions constantly. The relentless, genuine curiosity of a kindergartner who had not yet learned that some questions don't have good answers. Teachers at Whitesville Elementary described him as bright and eager. He liked being at school. He liked people. His closest friend was another boy named Justin Smith, who lived nearby and shared the same bus stop, the same dirt road mornings, the same unremarkable routine that defines childhood in small-town South Carolina. The two boys had the easy, uncomplicated friendship that forms naturally between children who live close enough to each other that proximity becomes loyalty. They walked together. They waited together. They were, in the way that 5-year-olds are, inseparable in the small world they occupied. Justin Lee Turner lived on Horseshoe Road with his father, Victor Turner, and his stepmother, Pamela Turner. His biological mother, Vivian Elaine Pace, lived separately, a fact that would become relevant to investigators later, though at this stage it was simply the shape of his family, unremarkable in the way that many families are restructured and rebuilt. The home itself was modest, a working-class household in a rural stretch of Berkeley County where neighbors knew each other by name and children moved between properties with the kind of freedom that felt safe because it always had been. Horseshoe Road was not the kind of address that appeared in news reports. It was not the kind of neighborhood where people locked their doors out of fear. It was ordinary, quietly, completely ordinary. And Justin moved through it the way children do, without awareness of how fragile ordinary can be. That Friday morning, March 3rd, 1989, began the way every school morning did. Breakfast, his cinnamon cereal, the bowl he pushed back from when he was done, getting dressed, was the small preparations of a kindergartner who understood the routine, even if he couldn't articulate why it mattered. Somewhere in the house, the morning moved forward the way mornings do, unremarkable until it wasn't. He was 5 years old. He had a best friend named Justin who was waiting at the end of the road. He had a teacher who would later say he was one of those students you remember. Not for any single dramatic reason, but because his presence was felt. Because when he wasn't there, the room noticed. On March 3rd, 1989, the room noticed, the bus stop noticed, and eventually all of Berkeley County would notice. Because a boy who walked a road he had walked 100 times before simply did not come back. The morning of Friday, March 3rd, 1989, moved the way most Friday mornings do in rural South Carolina. Unhurried, yet unremarkable, the week winding toward its end with no particular sense of urgency. Inside the Turner home on Horseshoe Road, Justin had eaten his breakfast and was dressed for school. The bus would come. It always came. And the walk to the neighbor's driveway, that short, familiar stretch of dirt road, was the same walk it had always been. At some point between leaving his front door and reaching the bus stop, Justin Lee Turner disappeared. No one saw it happen. That detail, the absence of a single witness along a route that short, in a community that close, would quietly become one of the most troubling aspects of this entire case. There were no screams reported, no vehicles seen pulling away, no disturbance of any kind that anyone could later recall. A 5-year-old boy walked out of his home and into a morning that swallowed him whole, and the world around him continued as if nothing had shifted. At Whitesville Elementary School, Justin's empty seat drew no immediate alarm. Teachers noted his absence the way absences are noted. A mark in a register, an assumption of illness. Classmates moved through their day. The hours passed. Before we go further, if this is your first time on this channel, hit that subscribe button right now. Cases like Justin's deserve to be heard, and your subscription ensures stories like this one reach the people who need to hear them. It was not until the late afternoon that the silence became impossible to ignore. Around 4:30 to 5 o'clock in the evening, Pamela Turner left the house and began walking to neighboring properties, asking a question that no parent wants to ask. Had anyone seen Justin? The answers she received were the same at every door. No, not today, not since yesterday. Then she reached the home where Justin Smith lived, and Justin Smith, 5 years old, Justin's closest friend, the boy who waited at the same driveway every single morning, told her something that stopped everything. Justin had never been on the bus that morning. He hadn't been at the stop. He hadn't shown up. Justin Smith had waited the way he always did, and his friends simply hadn't come. In that moment, the last possible innocent explanation evaporated. Pamela Turner called 911. Within minutes, deputies from the Berkeley County Sheriff's Office were en route to Horseshoe Road. Among the first to arrive were deputies James Gather and Philip Mason, and they pulled onto the property as the sun was already beginning to set, the sky over the pine trees shifting from pale gold to gray, and what had begun as a missing child report was already carrying the weight of something far more serious. The questions came quickly. When had Justin last been seen? What was he wearing? Which direction would he have walked? Who else had been home that morning? The answers were incomplete, inconsistent in places. And the timeline, the narrow window between Justin leaving the house and the bus departing without him, was troublingly short. Too short for a stranger to have appeared unnoticed. Too short for a child to have simply wandered far enough to disappear. Short enough that whatever happened to Justin Lee Turner almost certainly happened close to home. When the search began as the last light left Berkeley County, and somewhere in the gathering dark, a 5-year-old boy was waiting to be found. What began with a handful of deputies on a darkening dirt road grew, within hours, into something that Berkeley County had rarely seen. By nightfall on March 3rd, law enforcement had expanded the search perimeter significantly. Officers from the Berkeley County Sheriff's Office moved systematically across the Turner property, checking the house room by room, looking inside vehicles, pulling open shed doors, shining flashlights into crawl spaces and drainage ditches. Tracking dogs were brought in, their handlers guiding them along the dirt path Justin would have walked, hoping for a scent trail that would lead somewhere definitive. It led nowhere. The dogs worked the road. They worked the tree line. They circled back. And each time the trail dissolved. Not gradually, And the way a trail fades when a child wanders and the scent disperses naturally over distance, but abruptly, as if the path simply ended. Experienced handlers know the difference. A trail that fades means movement. A trail that stops means something else entirely. Neighbors joined without being asked. That is the nature of tight-knit rural communities. When a child goes missing, you don't wait for an invitation. Families from surrounding properties arrived with flashlights and work boots, forming search lines through the dense pine forests that border Horseshoe Road. They called Justin's name into the dark. They checked every outbuilding, every overgrown corner of every property within reasonable distance. Ponds in the area were dragged. Every vehicle on and near the property was searched. The house itself was gone through again. Eat nothing. This case is exactly the kind of story this channel was built to cover. Layered, unresolved, and demanding of serious attention. If you haven't already, drop a like on this video. It takes 2 seconds and it helps make sure cases like Justin's don't get buried. By Saturday morning, March 4th, the search had grown to more than 100 people. Additional deputies, rescue teams, and volunteers arrived as word spread through the community. The scale of the effort was significant for a county of this size. A genuine mobilization driven by the fear that had settled over every household on and around Horseshoe Road. Parents kept their children inside. Schools in the area were quietly placed on alert. The questions circulating through the community had shifted overnight. It was no longer where is Justin, it was who took Justin. Because by Saturday, the consensus among both investigators and residents was hardening around a grim conclusion. A 5-year-old boy does not vanish from a short, familiar walk without cause. And yet, there was still nothing. No physical evidence of an abduction, no tire tracks from an unknown vehicle, no witnesses who had seen anything unusual on Horseshoe Road that Friday morning, no discarded clothing, no signs of a struggle anywhere along the route. The absence of evidence was itself a kind of evidence, though what it pointed toward, investigators were not yet ready to say publicly. What they noted privately was this: in cases involving stranger abductions, there is almost always something left behind, a disturbance, a sighting, a moment where the outside world intersects with the child's world and leaves a mark. Here, there was nothing from the outside world at all. The search continued through Saturday into the evening. Flashlights moved through the trees again. Names were called into the dark again. And again, Berkeley County went to sleep without answers. But the following morning, the search would end, not with relief, with devastation. Sunday morning arrived gray and still over Berkeley County. The volunteers who returned to Horseshoe Road that day carried the particular exhaustion of people who have been hoping for 2 days straight. The kind of tired that lives behind the eyes and settles into the shoulders. They had searched the same ground multiple times. They had called the same name into the same tree line. And still, nothing had come back. But they came back anyway, because that is what you do when a child is missing. I'd drop a magnifying glass in the comments right now if you think something about this search doesn't add up. We're about to get to the detail that changed everything. And I want to know if you're already seeing what investigators saw. Victor Turner moved through the property alongside investigators that morning, retracing ground that had already been covered. At some point, he approached a travel camper parked on the family's land, a structure that, according to multiple accounts from deputies and volunteers, had already been searched during the initial sweep on Friday night and again on Saturday. He opened a cabinet door inside the camper, and he shouted, "Here he is!" Those 3 words collapsed the morning. Searchers rushed toward the camper. Deputies pushed forward, and inside a storage compartment, small and closed, the kind of space a child could be folded into, lay Justin Lee Turner. He was gone. The search for a missing 5-year-old boy had just become a homicide investigation. What the autopsy revealed in the days that followed was as devastating as it was clarifying. Justin had been killed by ligature strangulation, a cord or similar object used with deliberate, sustained force. He had also been sexually assaulted. The medical examiner determined that he had almost certainly died within hours of his disappearance on the morning of March 3rd, meaning that while more than 100 people were searching the woods and calling his name, Justin had already been gone. That finding alone reframed everything. But it was a second detail from the autopsy that would quietly become one of the most significant pieces of the entire investigation. When Justin's body was discovered, it was unusually cold. Not the natural coolness of a body after 2 days, but a deeper, more pronounced cold that medical examiners noted as inconsistent with the conditions inside the camper over that time period. The temperature of his body suggested, to investigators, that he may have been stored somewhere with artificial refrigeration before being placed in the camper. A chest freezer was subsequently seized from the Turner home for examination. Let that detail settle for a moment, not as a dramatic flourish, but as a forensic question that investigators had to answer with science, not assumption. Because if Justin's body had been moved, if he had been stored and then repositioned after searches had already swept the camper, then the person responsible had not only been present during the investigation, they had been watching it. In the hours and days that followed the discovery of Justin's body, investigators faced a question that no one in the community wanted to ask aloud, but that the evidence was already beginning to answer. If there was no sign of a stranger, if the tracking dogs had found no trail leading away from the property, if the body had been found on private land, inside a structure that had already been searched, in a compartment that multiple people swore had been empty, then who exactly had access to all of it? The answer kept returning to the same address, Horseshoe Road. The first person investigators moved to formally eliminate was Justin's biological mother, Vivian Elaine Pace. She lived separately from Victor and Pamela Turner, and her relationship with Justin, while limited by the custody arrangement, was by all accounts genuine and loving. When notified of Justin's death, her reaction was described by those present as immediate and unconditional grief. More importantly, she had an alibi. At the time of Justin's disappearance on the morning of March 3rd, Vivian was confirmed to be working in another town entirely. Witnesses corroborated her location. Her cooperation with investigators was complete and consistent. She was cleared, which meant the investigation had nowhere left to look except inward. Attention turned to Pamela Turner. From the earliest stages of the investigation, Pamela's statements had created friction. Her initial account to deputies was that Justin had gone to school that morning, a claim that was almost immediately disproven by the school's attendance records and by Justin Smith's account of never seeing him at the bus stop. When that version collapsed, Pamela offered a revised explanation. She had been in the shower when Justin left and had simply assumed he had walked to the bus stop as usual. Witnesses complicated that account further. At least one person reported hearing a confrontation inside the Turner home on the morning of March 3rd. Raised voices, the sound of a physical altercation involving Justin. When pressed, Pamela acknowledged that she had disciplined Justin that morning, but characterized it as minor. A routine correction, nothing more. When investigators did not find that characterization consistent with what the autopsy had revealed. Where are you watching from tonight? Drop your city or state in the comments. This case unfolded in South Carolina, and I want to see how far this story has traveled. Cases like Justin's deserve an audience everywhere. Victor Turner's behavior during the search also drew scrutiny. Quieter scrutiny, but scrutiny nonetheless. Investigators noted the speed and certainty with which Victor had located Justin's body in a compartment that others had already searched and cleared. There was no hesitation, no systematic checking of the camper's other spaces. He went directly to that cabinet. And at some point during the investigation, Victor Turner approached one of the deputies on scene and asked a question that stopped the conversation cold. What would happen, he said, if someone in the family had done this? Detectives noted the question, they noted the timing, and they noted that it was asked not in the frantic, desperate way of a grieving father grasping for explanations, but with a particular, measured quality that stayed with the officers who heard it long after the conversation ended. Neither Victor nor Pamela was charged at this stage, but the perimeter of the investigation had contracted sharply. It now encompassed almost entirely the people who had lived with Justin Lee Turner on Horseshoe Road, and the next step would involve a machine that many people believe reveals the truth, but that the legal system treats with profound skepticism. On March 6, 1989, 3 days after Justin vanished and 1 day after his body was found, Pamela Turner agreed to take a polygraph examination. She failed. A second test was scheduled, but before it could be administered, the Berkeley County Sheriff's Office publicly identified Pamela as a suspect in Justin's death. On legal advice, she stopped cooperating with investigators entirely. The polygraph process ended there. And here is where the science matters. Because most people understand polygraphs the way television presents them, as truth machines, as definitive, as the moment where guilt is confirmed or innocence is proven. The reality is considerably more complicated. A polygraph, more accurately called a psychophysiological detection of deception examination, measures involuntary physiological responses: heart rate, blood pressure, respiratory patterns, skin conductivity. The theory is that deception produces measurable stress responses that the body cannot fully suppress. The problem is that stress and deception are not the same thing. A person who is innocent but terrified of being disbelieved will produce stress responses. A person who is guilty but psychologically detached, or who has convinced themselves of an alternative version of events, may produce very little. The machine measures anxiety. It does not measure truth. This is precisely why polygraph results are inadmissible as evidence in the vast majority of American courtrooms. The Supreme Court has never established a uniform federal standard requiring their admission, and most state courts, including South Carolina, treat them as investigative tools only. They can guide detectives. They cannot convict. What polygraphs can do, and what they did in this case, is shift the direction of an investigation. Pamela's failed examination did not prove she killed Justin, but it concentrated investigative resources on her in a way that shaped everything that followed. Behavioral analysts note that this is both the utility and the danger of polygraph reliance. It focuses attention, sometimes correctly, but it can also create tunnel vision that causes investigators to stop looking elsewhere. In a case already built almost entirely on circumstantial evidence, that distinction carried enormous weight, because the moment Pamela stopped cooperating, the investigation lost its most direct line to whatever had happened inside that house on the morning of March 3rd. And what remained was a forensic puzzle that science alone would struggle to solve. By the time forensic investigators had processed the Turner home, the camper, and the surrounding property, they had collected a significant amount of physical evidence: hair samples, fiber transfers, fingerprints from multiple surfaces inside the camper in the house. On the surface, that sounds like a strong evidentiary foundation. It wasn't. Every piece of physical evidence collected from the Turner property faced the same insurmountable problem, one that defense attorneys call the innocent explanation, and that forensic scientists call environmental contamination. Hair found in the camper? Justin lived on that property. His hair would naturally appear in every structure on it. Fibers matching clothing worn by household members? Expected. Her fingerprints belonging to Victor, Pamela, or anyone else who regularly accessed the camper? Entirely consistent with normal, lawful use of a shared family space. For physical evidence to carry weight in a criminal prosecution, it must do more than place a person near a location. It must place them there in a way that cannot be explained by innocent, routine contact. In a shared household, particularly one where the crime scene and the living space are the same environment, that distinction becomes extraordinarily difficult to establish. This is where the legal concept of chain of custody becomes critical, and where 1989 presented investigators with limitations that modern forensic science has since addressed, but could not solve at the time. Chain of custody refers to the documented, an unbroken sequence of possession of a piece of evidence, from the moment it is collected at a scene through every transfer, examination, and storage point, all the way to its presentation in court. Any gap in that chain, any moment where evidence changes hands without documentation or is stored in conditions that could allow contamination, creates a vulnerability that defense counsel will exploit. In a case where the crime scene had been accessed by over 100 volunteers, multiple law enforcement agencies, and family members before it was fully secured, the chain of custody challenges were significant. Evidence that might have been definitive in a controlled environment became arguable in this one. And this is the part of true crime that rarely gets discussed: the gap between what investigators believe and what they can actually prove. If you're finding this breakdown valuable, share this video with someone who thinks these cases are simple. They never are. There was one additional forensic dimension that made this case particularly complex, and it connected directly back to the detail that had unsettled investigators from the moment Justin's body was found. The cold. The unusual, unexplained cold of a child's body discovered 2 days after death in a camper that had sat in the March air of South Carolina. That detail required a different kind of science entirely. When a person dies, the body begins a predictable, measurable process of temperature decline. It is called algor mortis, from the Latin for cold death, and it follows a relatively consistent pattern. Under normal conditions, a body loses approximately 1 to 1.5 degrees Fahrenheit per hour until it reaches the temperature of its surrounding environment. After that, it stabilizes. Forensic pathologists use this rate, combined with the ambient temperature of the location where the body was found, to estimate the time of death within a reasonable window. But that calculation depends on one critical assumption: that the body has been in the same environment the entire time. When Justin's body was discovered inside the camper on the morning of March 5th, the temperature reading recorded by the medical examiner was inconsistent with what algor mortis would predict for a body that had been inside that camper since Friday morning. It was too cold. Not slightly, not within the margin of natural variation, but cold in a way that suggested to the examining pathologist that Justin's body had at some point been exposed to a significantly lower temperature than the interior of the camper could account for. The investigative conclusion was straightforward, if deeply disturbing. Justin's body may have been stored in an artificially refrigerated environment, most likely a chest freezer, before being moved into the camper after earlier searches had already cleared it. This is why investigators seized the chest freezer from the Turner home. In forensic terms, this kind of post-mortem relocation is referred to as body repositioning, and its significance extends far beyond the physical. When a body is moved after death, it tells investigators something critical about the perpetrator's state of mind. This was not a crime of pure impulse followed by panic. The repositioning, if confirmed, suggested awareness, calculation, and an understanding of the investigation's movements. It suggested someone who knew the search was happening and chose to act within it. What do you think about the freezer theory? Does the forensic evidence support it, or do you think there's another explanation for the body temperature anomaly? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear how you're reading this evidence. That question of awareness, of calculation, one of who on Horseshoe Road understood enough about the search to move a body between sweeps, leads directly into the most analytically demanding part of this case: the competing theories, and the evidence that supports and undermines each one. In any criminal investigation, the theories that emerge are only as strong as the evidence that supports them. And in the case of Justin Lee Turner, the evidence, compelling in places, frustratingly incomplete in others, points in more than one direction. What follows is not a verdict, it is an analytical framework. 3 distinct theories, each with its own evidentiary foundation, each with its own contradictions, each still relevant to understanding what may have happened on Horseshoe Road on the morning of March 3rd, 1989. Weigh them carefully. Theory 1. Pamela Turner acted alone. This is the theory that investigators ultimately pursued most aggressively, and the one that led to Pamela Turner's indictment in December of 1989. To supporting evidence, Pamela's initial account, in that Justin had gone to school, was demonstrably false. Her revised explanation, that she had been in the shower and assumed he left, was contradicted by at least one witness who reported hearing a physical confrontation inside the home that morning. She acknowledged disciplining Justin, but minimized its severity in a way investigators found inconsistent with the autopsy findings. She failed a polygraph examination, and after being publicly named as a suspect, she ceased all cooperation with law enforcement. Contradicting evidence. No physical evidence directly and exclusively tied Pamela to Justin's death. Everything collected was explainable by normal household contact. The polygraph, as established, carries no legal weight. For her revised account, while inconsistent, does not constitute proof of guilt, and the question of how a single person managed to conceal a body monitor an active search involving over 100 people, and reposition Justin's remains without detection has never been fully answered. Why it still matters. Pamela Turner was indicted. That means a grand jury, having reviewed the available evidence, found sufficient probable cause to believe she may have been responsible. That threshold is not a conviction, but it is not nothing. This theory remains the most legally developed of the three. Which theory are you leaning toward right now? Theory 1, 2, or 3? Drop your answer in the comments and tell me what piece of evidence is driving your thinking. And this is exactly the kind of case where the audience sees things differently. And I want to know what you're seeing. Theory 2, Victor Turner. Had knowledge or involvement. Victor Turner was never charged, but his behavior during the investigation generated questions that were never fully resolved. Supporting evidence. Victor located Justin's body with a speed and directness that struck investigators as unusual, moving to a specific cabinet in a structure that had already been searched without apparent hesitation. His question to a deputy, "What would happen if someone in the family had done this?" was noted and documented. If the body repositioning theory is accurate, Victor's presence on the property throughout the search gave him both opportunity and access. Not contradicting evidence. Locating a body quickly does not establish guilt, particularly for a father in a state of desperate searching. His question to the deputy, while unusual, could reflect the fear of a parent beginning to suspect someone close to him, rather than a confession of personal knowledge. No physical evidence connected Victor to the crime. He was never formally named as a suspect. Why it still matters. If more than one person was involved, or if one person had knowledge that another acted upon, the full truth of what happened that morning has never been established. Victor's behavior raises questions that the investigation acknowledged but never conclusively answered. Theory 3, a third party with property access. This theory is the least supported by physical evidence, but it cannot be entirely dismissed, and intellectual honesty requires that it be examined. Supporting evidence. The complete absence of forensic evidence connecting either Pamela or Victor definitively to the crime leaves a technical evidentiary gap. If an individual with legitimate access to the Turner property, a frequent visitor, a neighbor, someone known to the family, had been present that morning, their presence would not necessarily have registered as suspicious. The body repositioning, if it occurred, required knowledge of the search's movements, something a property familiar outsider could theoretically have possessed. Contradicting evidence. No witness reported seeing an unfamiliar or unexpected person on the property that morning. The tracking dogs found no trail leading away from the immediate area. On the intimate nature of the crime, committed inside or immediately adjacent to the home, with the body concealed on private land, strongly suggests someone with deep familiarity with both the property and the household's routines. Stranger involvement, while theoretically possible, is contradicted by almost every physical and behavioral indicator in this case. Why it still matters. In cases where a conviction is not secured, or where the full circumstances remain legally unresolved, alternative theories must remain on the table. Closing off possibilities prematurely has derailed investigations before. Until the complete truth of March 3, 1989 is established in a court of law, no theory can be permanently retired. In December of 1989, 9 months after Justin Lee Turner was found inside that camper on Horseshoe Road, a Berkeley County grand jury returned an indictment against Pamela Turner. She was charged with homicide, and with that indictment, the case moved from the realm of investigation into the far more demanding arena of criminal prosecution, a space governed not by suspicion or behavioral inconsistency, but by a standard that the American legal system holds as foundational. Beyond a reasonable doubt. That phrase is used so frequently in true crime content that it has almost lost its weight. It shouldn't have. Beyond a reasonable doubt is the highest evidentiary standard in the American legal system. It does not mean absolute certainty. No legal standard demands that. What it means is that after hearing all of the evidence presented by the prosecution, a jury must be firmly convinced of the defendant's guilt. Not probably guilty. Not likely guilty. firmly convinced to a degree that leaves no reasonable alternative explanation standing. For prosecutors in Berkeley County, that standard presented a significant challenge. What the prosecution had was this: a defendant whose initial statements were demonstrably false, whose revised account was contradicted by witness testimony, who had failed a polygraph examination, and who had ceased cooperating with investigators after being named publicly as a suspect. They had a victim found on private property in a structure accessible to household members, with cause of death consistent with a deliberate act rather than an accident. What they did not have was a single piece of physical evidence that exclusively and irrefutably placed Pamela Turner as the person responsible for Justin's death. Evidence that could not be explained away by the innocent contact of daily household life. In a circumstantial case, the prosecution's task is to construct a chain of inference so complete and so consistent that no reasonable juror could look at it and find an alternative explanation that holds together. If you've been following this case from the beginning of this video, you already understand how difficult that chain is to build here. Share this video with someone who follows true crime, because the legal dimension of this case is exactly what makes it so important to understand. In that task, building an unbreakable circumstantial chain around evidence that lived inside a shared household would define everything that followed in the courtroom, and what followed was not straightforward. Pamela Turner's case moved through the South Carolina court system carrying the full weight of its evidentiary limitations. The question was never whether investigators believed she was responsible. The question was whether belief, however well-founded, could be transformed into proof sufficient to satisfy 12 jurors beyond a reasonable doubt. That is the distance between suspicion and conviction. And in the case of Justin Lee Turner, that distance proved to be considerable. This is the section of Justin Lee Turner's story where the narrative refuses to resolve neatly, because it doesn't. This search has uncovered major verified developments that significantly update this case. There is critical new information that must be incorporated, including a 2024 rearrest, a serial killer theory, and a final dismissal with prejudice, incorporating all of it now. This is the section of Justin Lee Turner's story where the narrative refuses to resolve neatly, because it doesn't. The original charges against Pamela Turner, indicted in February of 1990, were dropped later that same year. Prosecutors cited insufficient physical evidence. The case went cold. Years passed, decades passed. Justin's name faded from headlines, and though never from the memory of those who knew him or the investigators who refused to let the file gather dust permanently. In 2021, the Berkeley County Sheriff's Office Cold Case Unit reopened the investigation. Sheriff Dwayne Lewis and his team began reevaluating existing evidence using forensic technologies that simply had not existed in 1989. Among the tools applied were advanced fiber analysis and video enhancement, including a review of footage captured by a WCBD news videographer who had been present on the morning of March 5, 1989, when Victor Turner located Justin's body. That footage, investigators said, showed Victor moving directly and without hesitation to the specific cabinet where Justin was found. A detail that, when viewed through the lens of 35 years of accumulated suspicion, carried new weight. On January 9, 2024, both Victor Lee Turner and Megan Renee Turner, formerly known as Pamela K. Turner, who had legally changed her name in the intervening decades, were arrested at their home in Cross Hill, South Carolina, and charged with murder. It was the first time Victor had ever been formally charged. Both were released on $50,000 surety bonds. The case, however, did not survive the courtroom. On June 7, 2024, Judge Roger M. Young Sr. dismissed all charges against both Turners with prejudice. That designation is legally significant. It means the charges cannot be refiled, ever. The ruling was final and permanent. Judge Young's reasoning was precise. The 35-year delay in bringing charges had caused what he termed substantial, actual prejudice to both defendants. Approximately 20 witnesses were deceased or medically unavailable. Critical physical evidence, including the camper itself, clothing with urine stains, and a dog leash believed to be the ligature, no longer existed. The state, the judge found, had failed to identify any justification for the delay that could outweigh the harm done to the defendant's right to a fair trial. Ninth Circuit solicitor Scarlett Wilson released a statement acknowledging the ruling, saying her office had no grounds to dispute the court's findings. She noted that mistakes made 35 years ago could not be remedied. Sheriff Lewis, who had championed the reinvestigation, he called it not the outcome we were seeking, but said he understood the legal reality of prosecuting crimes that occurred decades earlier. One additional theory entered the record during the dismissal proceedings, introduced by the defense with the support of a University of Virginia law professor and Innocence Project director. It centered on Richard Mark Ebenitz, a confirmed serial killer from Columbia, South Carolina, known to target young children near bus stops in rural settings. Naval records confirm that Ebenitz's ship had docked in Charleston on March 3, 1989. The same morning Justin Turner disappeared. This theory was never investigated by the Berkeley County Sheriff's Office at the time, and whether it represents a genuine alternative or a legal strategy introduced to create reasonable doubt is, as of this writing, unresolved. This is where the case stands as of 2024. No convictions, no trial, no legally established truth. If you have any information about what happened to Justin Lee Turner on the morning of March 3, 1989, the Berkeley County Sheriff's Office can be reached at 8437-1944-00. Justin's family has made clear their fight for him will never stop. Justin Lee Turner was 5 years old. He liked cereal. He had a morning routine. He had a school he walked to, a road he knew by name, a world that was, by every measure available to a child that age, supposed to be safe. He did not make it to school on March the 3rd, 1989. He has never received justice. And that is the sentence that sits at the center of this entire case. And it deserves to be said plainly, without softening, without the kind of narrative closure that true crime content sometimes manufactures to give audiences a sense of resolution that the actual record does not support. There is no resolution here. 2 people were arrested in 2024, 35 years after a 5-year-old boy was found folded inside a cabinet in a camper on a rural South Carolina road. Those charges were dismissed with prejudice before a single piece of evidence was heard by a jury. The physical evidence is gone. The witnesses are gone. The camper is gone. The legal window has closed permanently. What remains is a child's name, a family's grief that has spanned decades, and a community that has never fully made peace with what happened on Horseshoe Road. Cases like Justin's expose something important about the systems we trust to deliver justice. Not to condemn those systems wholesale, but to understand them honestly. Evidence degrades. Witnesses die. Memories shift. Institutions make decisions in the early hours of an investigation that cannot be undone 30 years later, no matter how much technology improves or how much political will exist to revisit them. The gap between what investigators believe and what a court of law can prove is not a flaw in the system. It is the system designed deliberately to protect the innocent, even when that protection sometimes shields the guilty. That tension does not resolve. It simply has to be held. Justin Lee Turner deserved better than what the systems around him provided, in life and in death. His name is worth remembering, not as a case number, not as a cold case file, not as a data point in a conversation about forensic science or prosecutorial delay. As a child, 5 years old, who liked cereal, who had a morning routine, who should have made it to school. If this case stayed with you, if Justin's story is one you think deserves more attention, share this video. Leave his name in the comments. That is the smallest and most human thing any of us can do for a child the legal system was ultimately unable to protect. And if you're new here, this channel exists because these stories matter. Subscribe so you're here for the next one.